You're listening to HECM World Weekly, the nation's only weekly podcast bringing reverse mortgage news to you, the mortgage professional. There are reverse mortgage calculators, but then there are reverse mortgage point-of-sale solutions. Lenderful Solutions helps you get more loans, retain more customers, and even make online applications a reality. To learn more, visit lenderfulsolutions.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to HECM World Weekly. I'm Gabrielle Hayen. This week, we're seeing more signs that home equity is moving closer to the center of the retirement conversation in America. Not just for reverse mortgage professionals, but for financial planners, investors, economists, and retirees themselves. We've got new data showing homeowner equity beginning to soften, fresh concerns about retirees overestimating the value of their homes, a surge in senior housing investment, and growing discussion around how older Americans will actually fund retirement in the years ahead. And throughout all of it, one theme keeps coming up. Housing wealth matters more than ever, but accessing it and using it strategically is becoming increasingly important. Let's get into it. We'll start with new housing equity data from ATTM. According to ATTM's latest Home Equity and Underwater report, the percentage of equity-rich homeowners in America has now fallen to its lowest level since 2021. Around 43.3% of mortgaged homes are considered equity-rich, meaning the homeowner owes no more than half the value of the property. Now, to be clear, that's still historically very strong. American homeowners, especially older homeowners, are still sitting on enormous amounts of housing wealth. But the trend is shifting. Higher mortgage rates and cooling home prices are starting to slow the extraordinary equity growth we saw over the past few years. At the same time, the number of seriously underwater properties is beginning to edge higher as affordability pressure builds across parts of the market. What's interesting, though, is where the strongest equity positions still exist. ATTM found the highest concentrations of equity, which is rich homeowners, were in states like Vermont, New Hampshire, Montana, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. And for reverse mortgage professionals, I think this data reinforces something important. This conversation is no longer simply about record equity. It's becoming a conversation about timing, strategy, and planning. Because the reality is, housing wealth on paper doesn't automatically translate into financial flexibility later in retirement. And that brings us to another really interesting story this week. The New York Times ran a feature looking at how many retirees may actually be overestimating the amount of usable wealth they'll ultimately get from their homes. Now, that sounds surprising at first. After all, older Americans collectively hold something like $13 trillion in housing wealth. But the article highlighted research showing older homeowners often receive lower prices when selling compared to their younger sellers, even when the homes themselves are similar. And there are a few reasons for that. Deferred maintenance, older styling, the physical challenge of preparing a property for market, and sometimes simply urgency. People wanting to reduce stress, simplify life, or move quickly. It shows that some retirees knowingly accept lower offers because certainty and simplicity become more important than maximizing every dollar. And I think this is a really important point for our industry. Home equity isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. There's a human side to it. There's emotion, timing, health, family pressure, mobility concerns, and lifestyle considerations, which is why reverse mortgage professionals increasingly have an opportunity to act less like product salespeople and more like strategic guides. Helping clients think proactively about housing wealth before they hit a pressure point can make a massive difference to outcomes. And speaking of retirement housing decisions, another major trend this week centered around senior housing. A report highlighted by Fortune showed senior housing has suddenly become one of the hottest sectors in American real estate. Billions of dollars are pouring into the space as investors prepare for what's often called the silver tsunami. The U.S. population aged over 80 is projected to grow dramatically over the next decade. And, of course, more than 10,000 Americans are still turning 65 every single day. So naturally, investors see an opportunity. But there's a catch. Affordability is becoming a major issue. Average senior housing rents have climbed to more than $5,400 per month, and that's putting huge pressure on what analysts are calling the forgotten middle. These are retirees who earn too much to qualify for assistance, but not enough to comfortably afford premium senior living options. And this is where things get really interesting for our world. Because while billions are flowing into senior housing development, many older Americans may still prefer or financially need to remain in their homes for longer, which means aging in place continues becoming a critical conversation. That theme came up again in another article this week from Barron's, looking at the growing dilemma retirees face between aging in place and downsizing. For years, downsizing was almost treated like the default retirement strategy. Sell the family home, pocket the difference, simplify life. But today, it's not nearly that straightforward. Higher rates, high property prices, taxes, moving costs, and limited inventory are all complicating those decisions. In some cases, downsizing doesn't even create the financial relief retirees expected. At the same time, staying in the home comes with its own challenges: maintenance, healthcare access, home modifications, and ongoing cash flow pressure. So retirees are increasingly looking for flexibility, not one-size-fits-all answers. And once again, housing wealth sits right at the center of that discussion. Another fascinating development this week came from the mainstream financial planning world. Kiplinger ran a feature looking at how wealthy retirees are increasingly exploring home equity products as part of broader retirement planning strategies. And what stood out to me wasn't just the fact that they were talking about home equity, it was how they were talking about it. This article suggested the future of home equity won't simply be defined by rates or pricing. It'll increasingly be defined by simplicity, flexibility, and ease. In other words, how seamlessly can housing wealth integrate into someone's broader financial plan? That's a very different conversation from where the industry sat years ago. It suggests home equity strategies are becoming more normalized within advisory and wealth management circles. And that creates a real opportunity for reverse mortgage professionals who position themselves as a part of a broader retirement strategy conversation. And finally, this week, there's more pressure building around retirement affordability generally. New projects suggest Social Security benefits could rise nearly 4% in 2027 because of inflation pressures tied to energy, shelter, and food costs. But many experts argue retirees are still falling behind. According to advocacy groups, Social Security benefits have lost meaningful buying power over the past decade because cost of living increases simply haven't kept pace with real-world expenses. And I think this is really the broader context tying all of these stories together. Retirement is becoming more expensive. Housing decisions are becoming more complex. And older Americans are increasingly being forced to think strategically about assets that previous generations may have viewed more passively, especially home equity. When you step back, the big picture this week is pretty clear. Housing wealth remains one of the most important retirement assets in America, but the way retirees access, protect, and use that wealth is evolving quickly. And that places reverse mortgage professionals in an increasingly important position, not just as loan originators, but as educators, strategists, and guides helping older Americans navigate a much more complicated retirement landscape. Thanks for joining us for this week's HECM World Weekly. You can find the full companion article, links to all of the source stories, and more reverse mortgage news and insights at HECMWorld.com.